Welcome to Ted and Karen's excellent jet fuel hoax debunking adventure. This video is meant to be a comprehensive jet fuel hoax debunked video to address the claim that jets don't use fuel, or that jets don't use as much fuel as we are told, so the airlines can charge for fuel that doesn't exist and lie to the public about it. The two videos that are the most viewed and most shared regarding this topic are these videos from the channel Spacebusters, Important Info for All Air Travelers / Jet Fuel Hoax, and Part 2, Important Info for All Air Travelers, Jet Fuel Hoax Nobody Owns the Air. We will go through each video and address it point by point. After that, we go over fueling jumbo jets and inspecting the fuel tanks of jets, and we also go over famous airplane crashes that list fuel starvation as the cause. Timestamps are in the pinned comment under the video. Comments will be open, so let us know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.
Greetings, fellow air travellers. This video is for everyone who has ever bought an airline ticket. I'm going to make this video as short as possible, but the large amount of information included will inevitably dictate the length, so please bear with me. Hopefully at the end of this video I will have convinced you that there is a deception going on right in front of your eyes. This affects every person that has ever travelled on a modern day airliner. If you're not convinced, then I hope that this information will have planted a little seed of thought that you can use later on when something else related comes to light. We have been told that the fuel for a flight consists of about 50% of the ticket price. We have accepted this information for many, many years. What if that information was wrong? What if the manufacturers knew this and chose to keep it quiet?
Right, pause there.
We've all experienced walking
Pause
up the
there.
airplane steps.
Yeah. And it's talking about the manufacturers. It's like this is like a multi-tiered deception because you have the airframe makers, either be like Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, etc. You also have the engine manufacturers. You have that's like Rolls-Royce, GE, Pratt and Whitney. So there's three. You got total. There's like a 6 combinations right there. Then you have the dozens and dozens and dozens of different airlines all over the world. This would be it'd have to be a big, complicated deception, but I guess we'll just continue.
Okay.
Stopping in the queue and looking around. We look at the wings, we look at the engines, and marvel at the size of these amazingly powerful pieces of modern technology. Sometimes we also see the fuel being pumped into the wings. We think nothing of it. But what happens if we put our common sense hat on and take another look? The Airbus A380 is a truly amazing feat of engineering. In a purely bums-on-seats configuration, this aircraft can take almost 900 passengers. A typical coach takes about 50 passengers, so the A380 can take approximately 18 coach loads of people. That's a lot of people.
Not every time.
According to
Not every time.
There's none of the airlines do that. They typically max is around 550, 560 max, and they just showed one example there. The Etihad Airlines, usually they'll have like the entire top deck being business / first class, and the bottom being like an all economy. But they're not doing like a huge evacuation or something like that of people. But to be more realistic, it'll be around between like high 400s to mid 500s max, usually typically on an A380. And anyway.
Okay.
To their own specifications, the A380 can take 323,525 litres of jet fuel in the wing tanks. That works out at roughly 260 metric tons.
Wait, can we spot check that?
Oh, the metric ton. Oh, that the fuel
Yeah.
capacity. That is correct.
It is correct. 255.8.
And they said 260, so it's close. And then there's the thing they skipped on too is there's no mention of there's very little mention of the size of the aircraft and the fact that the A380 does have fuel carrying capacity of that 85,000 gallons. 8,000 of it is actually in the horizontal stabilizer, the little tiny wing, whatever I guess you want to call it, in the back. Also as like a trim tank as well. So it's a little bit less than
130 tons of fuel in each wing. I'll let that sink in for a minute because that is very, very heavy. That is the same as 16 red London double-decker buses on each wing. Or to
Yes.
put it another way, a herd of 22 fully grown elephants on each wing. How does that sound to you? Pretty incredible, right? But you can look this information up in the specifications and check it for yourself. Most of us have seen a plane refueling. They connect one or two hoses underneath the wing, connect that to a pump on board a refueling truck, which then pumps the fuel from underground tanks. This takes about 45 minutes for a full load. We never see the amount being pumped because the tanks are not visible. Let's make them visible and see how that looks. It would take 16 of these 20,000 litre trucks to fill the A380.
Where does all this fuel
Right,
go?
pause again here.
Okay.
Again, I mean, they're showing elephants, they're showing double-decker London buses. I mean, they're showing weight, but they're not showing volume. They don't, the strip, just nuts, bolts, engines, landing gear, no fluids inside an A380 alone, it weighs 300 tons right there on its own.
So just the
So
plane itself weighs 300 tons.
yeah, it weighs more than the fuel carrying and stuff. I know I know it's a lot of weight overall. Like, but you know, it means each pound of aircraft is only holding up what, maybe 3, 4 pounds. I mean, I'm pretty sure aircraft aluminum is strong enough to accommodate that because, you know,
Well, I remember Ben called into Coffee Talk not that long ago, and he was talking about the type of aluminum alloy that they use for the airplanes are specifically made to withstand a lot of torsion, specifically torsion.
yeah, because there's a lot of force being thrown at it. I mean,
Yeah. So the flex and all that stuff, it's built to have that flex.
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so another thing they also don't mention is like how much fuel, I mean, volumetric, you know, the size. I mean, they're not showing like how much fuel can fit in, say, I don't know, a cubic foot. And that's almost seven, it's a 7.48. So almost 7.5 gallons can fit in a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot wide, you know, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
configuration. They had no mention of the size of like either this fuel truck, no mention. I mean, they're just showing like, oh, it's this amount of gallons, this amount, like they just you don't have to discount all the cab, you have to discount the tires on the trailer, you discount everything. They're just like giving you these simple visuals in a really quick, rapid succession here to kind of get it in the back of your mind while they keep talking about these astronomical numbers. And they really need to kind of like slow down and show the volume of like how much space is actually being utilized here because they don't mention like again they don't mention the size of the aircraft itself, which you know the wingspan of the A380 is 262 feet.
Right.
So like 2/3 of 86% of a foot the length of a football field that you will see is occupied by those that from the side profile of that damn thing. It's huge.
Do we
I've
have
seen
the dimensions of the
oh yeah.
part of the wing that is filled by fuel?
Yeah, I could be able to pull that up. So right off the bat, though, it's like the length of the wing initiating from the fuselage to the back. Now, granted, it is not the entire container of where the fuel is. It's basically in between all these flight surfaces and everything. But we could be rough at housing, and maybe we'll say 30 feet of it initially, and then it'll go down, taper down to, you know, 5, 6, 7 feet near the wingtip and everything. Uh, and then these wings are 115 feet long themselves.
How wide do you think this section is? Like a fuel tank section is like one of them was like 10 feet, 12 feet.
Yeah, let's
We'll
say
just
let's
say
go 10.
10 feet
With about 20, we'll go for the initial kind of
for
thing
the
here.
for the
Just kind of
first
get a
part of the wing, and then the
yeah.
height.
How tall is that about? We'll go 10 feet initially because I know it is extremely tall. It could be plus minus, but don't want to get too crazy. Just 2,000 square feet cubed. Damn. 2,000 feet cubed can hold, so that's 7.5 gallons.
So 1 foot cubed is 7.5 gallons.
Roughly, yeah, 7.48 if you want to nitpick.
7.48. Okay, so we'll say 7.48 times 2,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's almost 15,000 gallons in one section.
Yeah. Yeah, they're saying it shows we got like what, you said 17,000 or
I said it was like
something.
a little under 15,000 gallons.
Okay, well here's 20,000 and that's between the fuselage and basically the first engine pylon right here.
Okay, just to get a little bit more in depth on the dimensions of the tanks inside the wings of the A380, I have here a technical drawing of an A380. It says right here A380. I pulled it from the maintenance manual of an A380 that you can get online. So, and it has a scale right here as far as dimensions go. Now, I could not find a top-down view inside the manual of the tanks, but I did take another top-down view. This is a basic top-down view of an A380. It tells you about basically what the tanks are, and it does match roughly what is shown on the A380 manual right here, the same basic configuration of tanks. Now this one isn't top-down view, this is an isometric view, so it's harder to get any sort of dimension off of what this is, but we're going to do our best. Here is our top-down view of the A380 tanks, and I have scaled it to match this technical drawing. Okay. Then we'll use this scale here. We'll use this scale here to get our best estimate of this first tank. Now this first tank, it's a feed, or it's actually two tanks. It's a feed tank and the inner tank, but it is estimated to hold about 19,000, almost 20,000 gallons of fuel according to this, right? So 12,190 gallons plus 7,750 gallons, 12190 plus 7750. 19,940 gallons is what they say is being held in these two tanks. So we'll go back to our drawing here and our A380 that is next to a two-scale diagram of the plane. So if we zoom in here, I basically copied and pasted this scale and didn't change the size of it. I just rotated it so that it could show you. So this is the feet. So you're looking at about a 15-foot width, right, from front to back on this dimension. Then from here to the fuselage, it's under 30. It's over 25, but less than 30, right? And then here, the length from this tank to the fuselage is well over 30. It's like 35. So it's not a rectangular tank, but we'll just guesstimate as close as we can. Okay. So if we go back, we're going to look at the tank. We're going to say, we'll do 25 wide, right? Or 25, we'll do a width of 25, which is probably being conservative. Front to back, the depth will be 15. Okay, so we'll do 25 by 15. The height of the fuel tank. Now, the height of the fuel tank on an A380 varies. So it's taller here, wider in this point than it is at this point, right? But you see you've got a man here, so it looks like it would be taller than him here and shorter here. And if the man's an average of 6 feet, that looks under 6 feet. This looks over 6 feet. I'm just going to use 7 feet, okay? But I was conservative on the width of the tank, the length, the other dimensions. So it should average out, right? So we'll say length 25, width 15, and the height 7. So that calculates to 2,625 feet cubed. Okay? So remember, so 1 cubed foot of water holds 7.48 gallons times 2625 equals 19,635. So that pretty much matches up.
Yeah, 82, I think it's like 8260, 8280, but that's in the back here.
Yeah.
And for comparisons, that's like basically that rear horizontal stabilizer is about the size of your wingspan on your typical 737 or A320 family aircraft right there. So gives you kind of, it's a city that flies.
Yeah, so
Uh,
A380s are massive planes.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish this whole series of videos they would go more with the aircraft that people are more typically in line to fly on, especially around domestic routes, which would be, like I said, the 737 or A320 family aircraft, which are a lot smaller. But I understand they want to like marvel at the massiveness of this guy, but
Yeah,
and
bring up
it.
this picture right here that you've got where it's the A380 right next to like a regular Southwest plane.
Oh yeah,
Right
okay,
there. Yeah, so
yeah,
that's a good example of how massive an A380 is, how much bigger it is in like a typical Southwest plane that a lot of people will fly on.
yeah, little 737 here, like 700 or whatever, and yeah, you could have that entire aircraft on the wing, and there'd be room left over.
That's
This thing is just ginormous. There's a
yeah,
reason why, but yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, that is why it can hold so much fuel.
Mhm. And here's even another comparison. An A380 and next to the next largest aircraft would be the 747. You can see this. I mean, these little black lines kind of signify where the fuel tanks are.
Right.
It, down here, right here on the horizontal stabilizer. But unlike the 747, the A380 does not have any center fuselage tanks, so but again, its wings are much bigger and thicker and wider. But here's where we go. Here's we go. Here's part of like the wing box of the A380 itself. Walk worker on it. This is before all the flight controls are added onto it. It is a massive section, and that is where the fuel is going to be from here, all the way down. But again, it tapers, so I don't know the full length and dimensions.
Right.
Size of a San Francisco apartment or something.
Or like Lowry's apartment in New
Yeah.
York.
Yeah, and they talk about like those fuel trucks, like how everything would fit. Here's 150 tons weight carried by 3.75 articulated lorries or trucks or whatever. But yeah, it doesn't even go the full length of the air. These things are just massive. Here we go. So specifications, 239 feet long, wingspan of 261 feet, 8 inches, fuel capacity, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, long distance, massive, crazy ultra comfort.
Where does all this fuel go? In the wings, you say? Okay, let's take a look at the wings, and you tell me where you think it all goes. This is the A380 wing. Pretty huge. Let's put a fuel truck next to it. And another. And another. And another. And 4 more.
Is that
Just
to scale?
for this wing.
No.
Another 8 go into the other
None
one.
of this is the scale.
Can you see what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
They're just slapping pictures.
Now let's take a look at the wings on these aircraft.
Yeah.
This is the new Dreamliner taking off in a spectacular fashion. Observe the thickness of the wings.
How
many
big is
fuel
the aircraft,
trucks would
huh?
fit in those wings?
It's like
Okay,
random
let's take a
speculation
look
the
at the
entire
fill
time.
rate.
Well, again, you have to consider the volume, and when you actually punch in the numbers, then you realize, like you were saying, one foot cubed holds 7.48 gallons, just 1 foot cubed.
And that's 7.48 times 6.6. That's, maybe about 50 pounds worth of fuel right there.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't mention the size of the Dreamliner, no mention of the size of the wings, no mention of the size of the tanks in those fuel trucks that they keep saying holds 10,000 gallons. I mean, there's so much vagueness and just so much like
It's suggestive.
very suggestive.
To fully fill the A380 takes approximately 45 minutes. To fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool takes about 4 days.
I think people are going to be really excited what
What
That is
size hose are they
2.5.
using to fill the Olympic pool versus
I
what?
know. What are the pressures? And they don't
Yeah.
mention the 2 pound difference between water and jet fuel per gallon. So
Million
there's
litres
got
of
different
water.
pressure rates
The
and such.
capacity of the A380 is about 8% of the volume. 8% of 96 hours is 7.6 hours. That's a lot longer than 45 minutes. So maybe the filling equipment is much faster for a plane. Let's take a look. This is filling a swimming pool. And this is filling an aircraft. To fill the tanks of an A380 in 45 minutes, you would have to have a pump and a hose that could pump 7,189 litres of fuel per minute. Let's look at something that pumps at about half that speed.
More suggestive.
Now the plane.
So they're showing a fire hose, but it's got a smaller nozzle on it too. That nozzle is reduced from the size of this hose to create a concentrated pressure because they have to direct that pressure at a fire.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
And
not really the same.
no, and the fuelers they have it just make sure it's secured, locked in, get all the numbers they need punched in, and go from there. Just make sure everything's safe and you're good to go. I mean,
Now the
you're
plane.
also
Right. So then
uh,
they lock this thing in place.
and they're
There's
pumping a less dense volume. But I guess a lot of people also think because they say that, the fuel be spraying and shooting right through the wing, the skin of the wing and everything. Thinking it's like this must be like an open cavity where the fuel pump is, or the fuel hose is connected to. But there's gonna be some bands going into where the fuel is being distributed to. So I don't know what too much suggestiveness going on, and it just gets the
They're also assuming that you have to completely fill the tank from empty
I don't
every
know.
time you fill up the plane.
And they come in completely empty too. I know. It's like they have to have fuel. It's like the fuel of the aircraft has many purposes. There's fuel oil coolers. It's like basically the fuel is run through heat exchangers to help cool the oil. And the oil in exchange also heats up the fuel, so it helps everything balances out. It's just like how a radiator works in a car. So it's just a whole bunch of, this nice little well orchestrated dance of fluids going on and such, like a ditty party to keep your aircraft in the air. But
Yeah.
I know, but what flight crew do before they take off, they'll see where the fuel is on their display gauges here. So, display gauges have to be accurate, or else for the last 80, 90 years, we've been flying on inaccurate aircraft or inaccurate reading fuel gauges, that would scare the living crap out of me because there's no shell station in 35,000 feet in the air. Yeah, so flight crew, they'll do the checks. They'll see how much fuel they need for the flight, how much for the taxiing, how much for reserves, or like final reserves. They also have like continuance, in case they have to like change course a little bit to go around maybe a storm or some bad weather. So extra throttle has to be applied or whatever, just extra mileage. Then there's like diversion fuel for like diversion airports in case their destined airport is bad weather and they can't land and they need to go somewhere else, or they have an emergency and they need to deviate somewhere. So they put all these calculations in. So it's like they're not going in completely bums empty and going completely full topped off because this is a business.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay.
Now the fire hose.
With a reduced size
Don't you
nozzle.
think that filling that wing.
And I know for a fact that the fuel pressure being pumped into the aircraft is like 50 psi, and it's like that's max regulated. Can't go too fast higher than that, but
Okay.
it still equates to
With that
300,
sort of
400 gallons
pressure,
per
would-
minute.
Okay.
Just rip a hole right through the top. It's only made of aluminium.
That's
So
not what-
far, we have no room.
So they're assuming that that's what the fuel looks like once it's going from the hose into the wing, which is a
Yeah.
false assumption because there isn't a tapered nozzle inside of the aircraft shooting at the top of it. Like, it
That's
just
that's
doesn't
exactly
even
the
make
thing. It's like
sense.
your basic automotive fuel tank where put the hose down and it'll just flow right into the cavity, blah blah blah. No
Yeah.
biggie. And like, no, this is like a series of ribs and spars and
So
a
this is
whole
just a completely false presentation about what's going on when you're filling.
Yeah, a
putting
complete
fuel inside of an
misrepresentation.
aircraft. Okay, yeah.
For all of that fuel.
An incredible weight of fuel, and a filling procedure that makes no sense whatsoever. Time to take a look at moving around with large bodies of liquid.
Oh boy.
The size of a large car's petrol tank is about 70 litres. Don't you sometimes wish that your petrol tank was bigger so you wouldn't have to fill up so often? There are reasons why this is so. Number one, the weight would drastically reduce the performance of the car. And number two, the amount of fuel sloshing about in the tank would seriously interfere
with the road holding whilst going around corners. This doesn't
Okay.
seem to be the case with
Yeah.
aircraft using vast quantities of fuel. Let's take a look at what large bodies of liquid does to road holding.
Oh. So
So
Not a
this
pretty
is just
sight.
another misrepresentation of what's going
Now
on
let's look at
inside
a
the
couple
fuel
of
tank.
landings of aircraft and try to imagine
yeah,
hundreds
they
of
actually have a
tons
top.
of fuel sloshing about in the wings. I think you might be getting the gist of what I'm trying to say. It is ridiculous to think that these aircraft take off, fly, bank, maneuver and land with large amounts of liquid moving in all directions.
That's because they don't. The
The
liquid
next
doesn't
video
move in all
clip is from the
directions.
US
Yeah,
Air
say if you
Force,
want, you can pause it
showing
here.
the
We can go over that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I was saying, the wings they're not just like hollow cavities with flight surfaces on either end for controlling the aircraft. It's like I said, uh, this superstructure is basically known as like the wing box, where like all the flight controls, the flaps,
Do you need to
ailerons,
share
slats,
screen?
engines. Oh yeah. Let's do that. Make
Because you
this a
look
little
like
easier.
you're
So
looking at something and talking about it, but I can't see it.
no, I ain't really looking at much. I'd have to
But
pull out my
again, to
pictures.
just to go over that all the tanks are not, it's not one big fuel tank. It's a whole
Hmm.
section of different tanks with a series of hoses and pumps and stuff
Yeah,
to keep them relatively
keep it.
equal.
Yeah, they got it. And plus the fuel is also pressurized via nitrogen. They have nitrogen generators on the outsides of the aircraft that go in, and there's a whole bunch of various plumbing that goes in to keep, and it's an inert gas, so it's not gonna it reduces the chances of sparking within the tanks. That's
Mm-hmm.
why people freak out, like, oh, you get all this fuel next to you at all times, you're afraid of like flying, and like, no, it's like it's incredibly safe.
But it's filled with
Uh,
nitrogen, so there's no oxygen inside the fuel tanks
No,
for the fire to
they
feed
do
off
have
of.
some oxygen, a little bit, and that's like to help kind of keep stuff more pressurized
Okay.
when fuel is being drained slowly. But for the primarily, you'll have your nitrogen, you'll have just the pressurization due to it at the altitudes, all the forces acted upon it. They're hermetically sealed, so you're not getting any external stuff being breaching inside it. But yeah, see all the wing stuff. All right, yeah, like I was saying, you have all the various ribs. This is not just like an A3. This is like in every aircraft. Ribs, you'll have a front and rear spar. This is helps what create your fuel tank essentially with the skin of the aircraft, also the wings hermetically sealing. And they do tests for that through like various drip tests to make sure that the aircraft, fuel is not going to be spoiling about and sloshing about. And this also prevents the minimizes sloshing. It's just various an array of baffles. Same thing. It's like a 737 essentially. You have flight controls X all in the front, and you see that your access ports where people can crawl in, or maintenance techs can go in and fiddle about or replace or repair. But yeah, it's pretty easy. Like all someone need to do is just do some like halfway quasi research on the topic. You can find this with basically any aircraft. The fuel inside the wings right now currently will probably be damn near minimal, enough to, still have about 15% or so, give or take, on board. It's not like a empty, but again, it's not also be a lot of not completely full either to keep, so they're saying, oh, this fuel will be sloshing, causing a massive weight shift. I'm like, no, remember, this is a 300-ton aircraft before the fuel is even added,
Yeah.
before the passengers are added, before the luggage is added, before everything else is added.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that extra weight in the center is going to help keep everything distribution of weight is the a lot make it easier for the aircraft to navigate around. even when landing, hard landing, crosswind landings, like we're watching this Emirates A380 doing right now. But yeah, continue.
Filling and strapping down of the large bladder tanks used for in-flight refueling of their aircraft. Bear in mind that these 3 tanks are only 9,000 US gallons. This is just under 10% of the fuel needed to fill the A380. Look at the lengths these guys go to, and the amount of straps needed to stop this lot sloshing around. Also, this 9,000 gallons takes up a good portion of the aircraft's cargo bay. Where on earth would you fit 10 times this amount on an A380?
So, what is this? Is this like a military refueling plane, like where they refuel like fighter jets, or what is this?
Yeah, it's like the tanks they would probably have extra bladders for doing mid-air refueling and such. But most of the time, or the transfer of fuel. But I mean, they have specified special vehicle. I mean, the specified
I
vehicles
can't
for
imagine that this is what they're using to refuel jets in the
No,
air.
this is probably more like a fuel transfer, maybe to some local base or something silly like that. I don't know. There's no. It just shows
there's
that
no
they're strapping it
context.
down.
Yeah.
Is it making sense
And
to you yet?
we're using like whatever is that,
Let's move on to
some kind of polymer. I don't know, maybe rubber polymer, whatever. It's it's very strong, of course. It's being strapped down by straps, sure, but it's not encased by a large aircraft aluminum wing. And inside those aircraft aluminum wings, they don't have these like bladders that they have right here. It's in the cavity. That's where it is, the tank. And so there's just a lot of
workings
apples
of a
and
modern-
oranges, a lot of vagueness, a
Yeah.
lot of
Okay, let's continue.
Fan turbine jet engine. Rather than explaining this myself, I will let this short video do the work for me. Observe that at the end they actually say that the secondary flow, which is only compressed air, is the major contributor to the engine's thrust.
Hear that, boys? What is it?
Just another narrow-body aircraft.
Hey, my atoms are shaking. Strange. It sounds far, but I bet my last proton, that beast is much closer than you think. Hold on, people. It's a LEAP-powered aircraft. A leap into the unknown.
What on earth is a leap?
Something you sure haven't seen before. Everybody get ready. We're going in.
Could someone please tell me what just happened?
Sure. The engine makes a plane move forward. Thrust is produced by air being pulled in by the fan blades. Then this air is ejected at greater speed through the exhaust, creating the required pushing force. This is a principle of Newton's law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So how is this possible?
Souls, come with me to the bypass.
Extreme sport freaks, with me, we'll hit the compressors, combustor, and turbines.
The LEAP is a high bypass ratio engine, which means that a large amount of air bypasses the core of the engine to be ejected directly into the exhaust stream. The fan acts like a propeller. Its curved rotating blades accelerate the airflow into the engine. Lighter composite materials provide better efficiency and resistance.
Here come the compressors. Get ready. Things are gonna heat up. Feel that? It's the low pressure compressor squeezing us. Now, the high pressure compressors. You're gonna feel the difference.
Ultra-efficient compressors deliver optimum air pressure and temperature conditions for combustion.
It's rising up now. Let's get toasted! Gentlemen, meet your kerosene counterparts. These guys are gonna light up your day.
Already? We usually mingle inside.
Not anymore.
I thought there'd be more of you.
Normally, yes, but in this engine, fewer of us are needed.
This little kerosene particle is right. The LEAP engine burns less fuel than former engines. In addition, the fuel nozzles mix fuel and air before they enter the combustor, creating a homogeneous mixture that minimizes the peak temperature during combustion. This technology significantly reduces emissions.
Okay, let's go.
The combustion chamber. This is the heart of the engine, where energy is created through combustion of fuel and compressed air.
Are you ready? Here comes the final blast.
What a boost! Where are we now?
Turbines, let's transfer our energy to them. This is the last extreme stage before we join the soft team. Enjoy.
Advanced material and aerodynamics make the turbines much more efficient and durable. The pressure and speed of the hot gases provide the force needed to turn the turbines and its shaft, which in turn drives the compressor and fan.
Come on, guys, don't hang around. We alone are responsible for 90% of the thrust from this baby. Here come those adrenaline junkies. So, how was it?
Fast, hot, and fantastic.
What a trip! Are you kidding me? It was us in the primary flow that did most of the job.
Not exactly, kid. It's teamwork. We definitely need each other. We provided the energy to drive the engine, and they provided most of the thrust to make the aircraft move forward.
Hey, boss. Sounds like we're in luck today.
You said it. It's game on again, boys. Let's go.
Now let's watch how compressed air, ejected at force into ordinary air reacts. This is an experiment that anyone can do at home. You compress air inside a plastic bottle, pop open the top, and see the result: water vapor. This is what is happening when the jet engines are in cruise mode. They are running purely on compressed air, and the contrails are water vapor being ejected out from the engines.
Okay.
While small amounts
here.
of fuel are
Okay, so I feel like the video we just watched kind of explained how jets use fuel and how they use so little fuel, and I find it funny that they put that in the video. It literally explains it. It's a
Yeah.
high compression engine, and it super compresses the air so that you need less fuel for more combustion.
It's like you gotta have still. I mean, you still have to have fuel going into the core part of the engine where the combustors are, where the fuel's being delivered and being atomized, mixed in with the air that's rushing in. Yeah, it's like yes, the 90% producing 90% of the thrust or the bypass. That doesn't constitute that there's like less fuel, but I mean it's like it's creating more thrust at less losses, parasitic losses, essentially. That's why aircraft are using like lighter materials, like use of carbon fiber and different polymers like that. But they're finding their limitations of what they can and can't do with the new ultra efficient high bypass turbofan engines. They can get incredibly massive, like what's going to power like the 777X and the current 777 family planes right now. But I mean, you still have to have fuel in it. It's still
Yeah.
going to have. I mean, you're not like offshooting Newton's laws because we have 90% coming from the bypass. I'm like, no, it's just more efficient engine. And they just said the turbines are actually powering the low pressure compressors as well as the fan.
And do
it's
you
like how
know, do you remember offhand what the percentage is of the fuel consumption goes down once the plane gets to cruising altitude? Because I know like takeoff it takes a majority of the fuel, and landing, so but probably more takeoff than landing, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But I know that I've heard or I read that once the plane gets it to cruising altitude, the fuel consumption goes down drastically.
Oh yeah, it's because they have like the various thrust settings they have on the throttles. Like they'll go about 90% or so on your typical takeoffs at pretty much most airports, unless it's extreme situations. But around 90%, and then they'll have various notches in their throttle. Like they'll have like maximum continuous thrust, which is basically kind of where they'll have throttle set during the cruise portion of flight, and they're cruising altitude and nothing's going on, nothing eventful. But yeah, most of the majority of the fuel per minute, whatever, is burned in those first like 10 minutes or whatever when they're
Yeah.
initial takeoff, initial climbing.
Okay, let's just keep going.
are needed to get the jet engine up to speed. When in cruise mode, the engines use very little to no fuel whatsoever.
Yeah, there's the last one.
We are being charged
Go over
huge
real
amounts
quick.
for fuel that doesn't exist. It's not needed to fly these amazing machines. All that's needed is the most abundant thing that we've been given: air. Air! I will end this video here with a clip of the A380 at an air show doing a slow pass. It looks as though it is levitating at one point, but that is the subject of the next video, which involves our little friends, the bumblebees.
Oh God.
Yeah, if you want, we could pause right here. I can go over this real quick. Like, aircraft fly via airspeed. The various sensors they have in the front of the aircraft, around the aircraft, the pitot tubes, they determine like the speed and all that. What would be your ground speed versus your airspeed can vary drastically. I mean, here you can hear the wind in the background showing it is a windy day. This is not a fully loaded A380 we're looking at. This is at an air show, so it's be the flight crew, maybe some media, and just have enough fuel basically to do what they need to do. It might be like a half load, less than that, and they probably got some water ballast inside, but they really don't go going like extremes and such, and they can go just above their stall speed and still be fine.
In this case, look at that. It is almost unbelievable. This, of course, is using the flight safety fly-by-wire programs that the Airbus things have installed.
Please feel free to pass this video along to whoever you might think would be interested. I'm sure that ordinary airline fare payers will have something to say about the cost of the fuel being the majority of the ticket price.
Yeah. And the last little bit would be like, there's no such thing as cruise mode.
Time to start
They have
asking some
autopilot.
pertinent questions to people high up in the airline industry. Thank you.
Alrighty,
Yeah.
so that is part 1 of the most watched jet fuel hoax video on the interwebs.
Yeah. The games began.
In part 1, we looked at the ridiculous amounts of fuel supposedly being pumped into these aircraft, and the possibility that the technology being used is way beyond the level they are telling us. To those who obviously misunderstood part 1, I need to clarify. The airlines claim that fuel constitutes 50% of our ticket cost. I'm not saying that fuel is not being used. What I'm saying is that it's a fraction of what we're being charged for and a minor part of flight technology.
Come on, guys, don't hang around. We alone are responsible for 90% of the thrust.
As stated in part 1, we have the engine manufacturers themselves saying that 90% of the thrust comes from the compressed bypass air and not from the combustion chamber. That's not me saying that. It's the people who design and make these jet engines. So it must be true, right? Yes and no. Let's get into it. To make sense of all this, we have to embrace the idea of the ether. The ether was a totally accepted element in the past. Before Einstein and his wife concocted the widely acclaimed relativity theories, everyone, including all of the scientists, knew the existence of the ether. In one fell swoop, Einstein got rid of the ether and everybody else followed suit. The age-old technologies used in the design of these aircraft and engines also utilize the properties of the ether. That's the bit they're not telling us. To do so would fly in the face of contemporary scientific thinking, and they would be forced to recognize the existence of this hugely important element.
So right here, this is misleading as well because they're showing archival footage of lighter than air travel. These are lighter than air travel machines. They fill the tanks with helium and hydrogen.
They're not fixed-wing aircraft that are dependent on internal combustion engines to propel them through the skies.
Exactly. Exactly. And even then, like, these are not claimed to be used, be made or fly using etheric energy.
I said at the end of part 1 that I would be mentioning our little friends, the Bumblebees. Well, to do that, I first have to bring you up to speed with Victor and Victor. If you visit Victor Schauberger's Ripley's Believe It or Not page, you will find it sadly lacking in important information. This man was a master at decoding the secrets of nature, a prolific writer and far ahead of his time, yet the mainstream scientists chose to ignore his work and label him a nutcase. Just this fact should throw up a plethora of red flags with people. This man dedicated his whole life to the study of nature, and he came up with some truly fascinating stuff. Levitation, propulsion through the ether, and implosion technology, to name just a few. Let's start with implosion technology, to show you that he wasn't just making this stuff up. As you will see in this clip, the gas that she's holding would normally be enough to blow a gaping great hole in her hand, but it doesn't. That's because it implodes rather than explodes. The force goes inwards rather than outwards. Implosion technology.
In 3, 2, 1... Okay?
You could judge by the loudness of the implosion that there was a great deal of energy created. Enough to seriously injure her, but apart from being slightly shaken up, she seems fine. Victor's main body of work was with water, but he postulated and demonstrated that this technology works just as well in other mediums. One of them being air, or the ether. Air is our medium, water is for the fish, but the two are intrinsically locked together because both mediums behave the same way when coerced. I highly recommend watching the links for Victor's work in the show notes. These patterns and properties are used throughout nature, in the environment, in trees and shrubs, in flowers, and in animals. Basically, the whole of nature conforms to these rules, and Victor figured it out. As I showed earlier, Victor confirms that using the vortex idea on an aircraft, it will literally suck its way through the ether rather than thrusting against the air molecules.
Schauberger's central approach here was the...
That's not how it works on an aircraft, and Victor Schauberger his profession was biomimicry. So I understand he did great work with water and flow and understanding nature and utilizing it for various inventions and such, but they also like trying to give him the gratitude that he's the man who created the jet engine.
They're trying to give him credit for jet engines, but he did not create jet engines.
No,
he basically just understood that nature has a lot of vortexes in it.
And it's like, and the jet engine was created by Sir Frank Whittle from England in like mid 30s when he was in the Air Force or Navy in Britain. Like he did it because he wanted to find a way to increase the. He was theorizing how it'd be able to allow planes to fly twice as high, twice as fast, XYZ, all that good things. Like there's no mention of Victor Schauberger and all his stuff.
I'd also like to know, because it's showing like these vortexes and stuff and these little tornado stuff, vortexes and stuff basically, which is all over nature, and wind does create vortexes and water vortexes and all this stuff, and all this stuff is fine and good. But when you look at the inner workings of the jet engine, like in the last video where we were just looking at it, nothing about that looks like biomimicry. They're all like finely machined little fan blades of different types of metals that are spaced a very specific space apart. One's turning this way, one's turning that way. Like it's a very technically advanced machined engine. It's not just a thing going in a vortex.
Yeah, I looked into it. It's like that's why engines are the single most expensive part on your commercial aircraft, because there's a lot of technology, a lot of very fine tuning for all the metal, very tolerances, everything to make sure everything is running perfect and harmonious. And they even have like vibration sensors in the cockpit. On their display, like show like our engines within range and such, because if something goes bad, it's going to cause a lot of shuddering, and it potentially could lead to engine failure in flight. So,
now, what is this even that we're looking at right here? Is this a jet engine or what is this?
This is apparently one of Victor Schauberger's
is it
Levitation type engines. And I actually I found a University of Queensland article about how, due to all his workings and this and that, not basically being shoved under the rug, but people were able to recreate it, and they still couldn't make any of this real stable workings. Maybe because Schauberger.
His alleged inventions have never been proofed out. Is that what you're saying?
No. Yeah, they've tried, and they come to the conclusion that it's not what they said we could really do.
As I showed earlier, Victor confirms that using the vortex idea on an aircraft, it will literally suck its way through the ether rather than thrusting against the air molecules.
Schauberger's central approach here was the principle of matter transformation. The elements of the air, particulate matter and gases are converted in this repulsator. One part escapes through the ring rotator, and the radiation energy, Schauberger talks about synthesis electricity, is emitted through the central axis. The repulsion creates a biological vacuum along the axis in front of it, into which the aeroplane is sucked.
The airplane is sucked? Wait, I don't get it. To which the aeroplane is sucked?
They're saying that somehow modern day aircraft are just
creating
sucked
suction
through the air.
They're saying it's creating suction. It's sucking its way through the ether instead of creating thrust off of air molecules. So, yeah. That's so ridiculous to make an assumption that you're sucking your way through the ether rather than creating thrust.
No, that's how they create the thrust. It's like they have more energy coming out the back
with the combustion and the fan, the turbo fan.
Going one way.
Just like it's almost like any other combustion engine.
Yeah.
Like why don't our cars just suck through the ether then?
I know. Can't we create that?
All right.
The relatively small amount of fuel on board is used for takeoff, landing, and taxiing. It's also used for the APU. The APU is the auxiliary power unit that's situated at the back end of most commercial aircraft. This is a small jet engine configured as a compressed air generator to feed the main engines at startup and during cruise mode, amongst other functions. I must just add something that I didn't address in part 1. Military aircraft like fighter jets use a lot more fuel than commercial aircraft. They need the extra power and thrust that combustible fuel gives. In cruise mode, a commercial airliner does not need the extra power as its forward motion is sufficient to suck enough air into the engine.
That's pause.
Just a little.
Yeah, the military aircraft, they need more fuel so they can do all their crazy maneuvers, high banking weapons, all that stuff, dogfights.
Yeah. They're doing
And aircraft, and this is like the thing that triggers me the most from this series of videos, like when they say repeat it over and over again, but that cruise mode, there is no cruise mode, there's no magical button they press and like pilots take a nap for the rest of that portion of the flight. And like, no, they just have they have their speed setting, they change their Mach, it's like they have their whole display on the front of in the cockpit or flight deck, whatever, their altitude, speed, their heading, whatever. That's it. That's all they need to do. The pilots, they're continuously monitoring, looking for any abnormalities, making sure their flight plan is still a-okay, checking various things along the course, like fuel consumption. Yeah, this is...
So as far as the APU, so let's address the APU. So they're saying that the APU is an engine that makes compressed air to start the plane's engines initially, which is true, right?
It force feeds and starts spinning up the
Now,
engines so they get to the speeds and...
yeah, does the APU run while the plane is flying
No.
in the air?
No. The only reason they would need to run the APU in flight, it would be like last ditch situation. Somehow they miraculously have an engine out.
Oh, and they're trying to get the engine started again.
It's ready to ignite, but they could do that off the running engine. So they don't need the APU. They only use the APU. It's like just a small generator early on. They either like
it's basically just part of the ignition system or initial ignition system for, I guess you would call it, for a jet, because it needs that compressed air, that initial start to get the fans turning.
And then the fuel and the sparking will come, and then they become a continuous flow of fuel mixing with air and self-ignites, kind of like a diesel engine almost.
And it is already sort of creating a flow, right? Because that's where you have these freak accidents in airports where people accidentally walk in front of a running airplane, they get sucked into the engine and they die.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Just a little observation here. The engines are designed to sit forward of the wings on pylons. From an engineering standpoint, it would be much easier to place them directly under the wings. As most people think, the jet engine spews out masses of superheated exhaust gas. If this was the case, then why would they put the exhaust directly under the wing where all the supposed fuel is stored? What
do you think about that?
That's garbage. It's heated. I mean, your exhaust spits out heated fuel. Your exhaust, it's like, are they like scalded to all heck?
But also, the plane's going like 500 miles an hour. It's not like that hot air is like sitting there constantly building up under the wing.
No, it's constantly being rushed out the back.
Yeah.
And as long as there's no fire going out the back,
you're right,
discoloring the paint or whatever on the aircraft, I think you'll be okay. Oh man.
Next time you look at an aircraft, try and find the scorch marks under the wings from all of the super hot gases. You won't find any. The small amount of hot gas being ejected from the combustion chamber is surrounded by cooler, compressed air. Don't you think that these people should be in hospital with nasty burns from the super hot gases?
No.
And I'll tell you why.
No, I don't. They should be in the hospital from sandblasting their eyeballs out.
I mean, there's a sign right here at this airport, which is, you pause if you want. That's St. Martin Airport, or SXM Airport, or St. Martin, St. Juliana, whatever. Anyway, But they have warning signs saying, that you're in the blast zone. And where that 747 was taking off, I've actually, now this I do have, and you see this 747 and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I went on Google Maps or Google Earth to see where, okay, here we are again at St. Martin. Zoom in here. Kind of see where the aircraft would have been. It turned and it's going to be starting to take off right about here.
Uh-huh.
And from this point to where all those people were, 703 feet. Keep that in mind. Here we go. And now here we have this is probably like A380. So anyway, but at full tilt throttle, but it's only going to blast about 200. There we go. So here we go, 30 feet wide at 200 feet distance. It's like, yeah, the temperatures will be warm, and right here it's showing about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They're still another 3 times further back.
Oh, but the temperature greatly reduces from here.
Yeah,
it reduces real quick.
Yeah, 7, 5, and they're not even at the back of the air. Like
So,
you'll be getting a blast of like, I don't know, 70, 80 degree temp coming at you.
I was gonna say, so by the time it reaches them, it's basically ambient temperature. You're just getting that wind, that thrust.
I mean, it's still gonna suck.
Before we leave Victor number 1, let's look at his vortex principles at work in real time. If you think his principles are just theories, then feast your eyes on this. Like the jet engine, the Garuda-San Giovanni route needs a small force to start it, but then impels itself infinitely using the medium around it. In this case, water.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it throttled? Is it?
Despite the downward force of this water...
Is it carrying heavier weight than it itself is?
I know, it must be a very light route.
Even vertically, just as the jet engine does through the medium of ether. There is much more to talk about with Victor Schauberger's vortex principles and how the aircraft manufacturers utilize the natural forces of nature to assist flight, but I don't want this video to be too long. Again, check out Victor's work for yourselves and you'll see the connections.
I mean, if somebody doesn't take into account the forces of nature when they're designing something like an aircraft, I think you're pretty dumb. Like they probably they should be taking all of that stuff into account. Like, I don't understand why they think somebody would design something like this and not do that.
Yeah. I honestly don't know. I mean, they have aircraft engineers for a reason, and like they're not just like slapping a bunch of metal together and going, "Yeah, here we go, see what happens." And what we won't tell them is like this magical ethereal properties, and Victor Schauberger are helping propel through the air on minimal fuel with no specificity and no real hardcore evidence aside from just speculation.
All right.
Time for Victor number 2. Viktor Grebennikov is lesser known than Schauberger, but his research and experimentation is just as extensive and important. It also derives its reasoning from nature.
It's a man named Grebennikov from Russia. Grebennikov was kind of a non-conventional scientist. He was an entomologist, did a lot of work with bugs, entomology. And his favorite thing was to go out into the steppes of Russia and into the various outer hinterlands and camp out in the summers and study his favorite subject.
This might look like a radio-controlled bee, but it's actually a bee with a little radar transponder on it, which means that we can track this bee as it flies around the field.
And these little guys can carry 90% of their body weight in pollen, so it won't affect the way it flies.
First of all, the bees are flying much faster than predicted, an incredible 30 miles an hour, even when fully laden.
They fly fast.
The next surprise is where the bees go. They almost always overfly potentially decent food. And once they've found their patch, they then repeatedly shuttle to and from it. And this is the really clever bit. In spite of 30-mile-an-hour crosswinds, whether out or back, they all fly in dead straight lines.
A bumblebee can't fly aerodynamically. Yeah, and he's right. And I said, well, what did bumblebees do? And he said, well, they levitate. And I said, well, how's that? And he says, come on, I'll show you. And he showed me. He wrote a book, incidentally. I don't know if it's still in print. It's in the Library of Congress. The book is called Tomorrow's Energy Need Not Be Fuel. And in that book, he gave reference to what I'm talking about, that, that of levitation, that the bumblebee, when he starts to beat his wings, when he starts to flap his wings, there's a little cavity, a hollow cavity next to the larynx inside his system that's hollow. And when he beats his wings, he starts to resonate this energy, and it goes back and forth, just similar to a guitar strumming on one side of the room and hitting the same chord on the other side of the room, or somebody hitting a high C and breaking a crystal. It's the same thing, it's resonance. And he said what they do, they resonate. And when they resonate, they eventually reach the resonance of the field around them. And he explained it this way to me, that the Earth was, of course, spinning, but it was operating on a frequency of 8.5 hertz per second or so forth. And he says once this bumblebee hits that resonant frequency of its surroundings, it becomes a free agent. It creates a magnetic bubble around itself, and it can go anywhere it wants. And I said, well, that's not in any of the science books. He said, I know. You probably never see it there either, but that's what happens. They'll discover it someday and bring it out, but it's just we have a conventional way of doing things, and then we have a natural way of doing things, and they're totally different. They're diametrically opposed.
The important point here is the bees. As you've heard, the bumblebee shouldn't really be able to fly. Those wings are way too small to lift that chubby little body off the ground. In fact, it's a bit of a conundrum also for the mainstream scientists. They can travel in perfectly straight lines for long distances without any deviation, even during a howling crosswind. Because of the resonant frequencies produced by the vibration of their wings, they create a bubble in the ether, protecting them from any outside interference. So levitation by sound waves is a real-world effect. You want more proof?
That the bug wings themselves were creating an anti-gravity phenomena under certain conditions.
These technologies are known and used in modern-day aircraft manufacture.
Okay, I just have to stop right here because that last whole few-minute section is really sort of a ridiculous comparison, in my opinion, because this right here is a picture of an A380, and this is a picture of a bumblebee. Does the bee look like it is anything like the airplane? Does the airplane that weighs 300 tons without anything in it look like it would use the same propulsion or type of propulsion as a bumblebee that weighs less than half a gram? I mean, the wings on the airplane don't even move. Plus, if there was some sort of sound that was creating the sonic levitation, everybody would hear it to begin with. It would be obvious. And the plane would just start lifting up into the air. Why would you even need a runway? So I just wanted to point out the sort of very obvious shortcomings in the logic in comparing these two things.
The vortexes being produced are helping the lift properties of the aircraft. This is why the engines are forward of the wings. If they were underneath the wings, then the vortex wouldn't do its job. It has to flow over and not under the wing.
Pause it again real quick.
Next time you fly.
What about the aircraft that have engines attached to the rear and the fuselage, like your DC-9s or MD-80s, your CRJ-900s, your Learjets, little T-tail, and they have the engines mounted right there in the back of the fuselage.
Mm-hmm.
So what, the vortices don't work then, or is like those planes don't have the Schauberger tech that these planes do, or it's like they're
no,
I don't know.
It's all magic. It's PFM. Yeah,
kind of.
I don't know. Clearly, there's different types of airplane designs, and they all don't have the engines like that. These Airbuses do, because for whatever reason, for this type of airplane, it works the best, right?
They chose it because just like low center of gravity, weight distribution. It's most commercial aircraft these days, aside from a few that are currently flying that have rear fuselage mounted or so with a T-tail kind of a thing. Yeah, but like for the most part, they all have them underneath the wings. like then we have Concorde here. I mean, yeah, again, that's at the
Well, that
back.
one
Where's
doesn't
its
have it.
forces?
This one's got the engines where it sticks right out the back.
Yeah, that's cool. Concorde. I'm like,
Let's see.
why don't they have it out front?
The intake is underneath the wing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so much for that idea.
Yeah.
I try to listen to the hum of the engines. It changes pitch when going into and out of cruise mode.
Oh.
Just pure speculation here, but
No
there
kidding.
are large cavities wings, which are tested with compressed air and not liquids, by the way, and the engines produce a distinct hum, just like the bees do.
It's almost like an exhaust.
So the tale of two victors comes to an end. I highly recommend watching all the video links in the description box, as you will gain a much better understanding of the natural forces at work here. As always, this is just my own musings, and they are by no means definitive, but the scientific evidence and the observable effects definitely backs up the theory. Two highly intelligent gentlemen that have had their research largely ignored by the mainstream scientific community, but the manufacturers are covertly using the technology to fly their planes. As per usual, it's
sure they
us,
are.
the consumer, who's losing out, while these huge companies are reaping the financial benefits.
Yeah,
In part
because
3,
airlines
we will
are
look
still
closer at the fuel tank explosion.
all the airlines from 100 years
suppression
ago are still
techniques
flying today.
using the inert gas nitrogen. Nitrogen doesn't burn, but the question is, how fast does it expand when vaporized? Stay tuned and see you in part 3. Thank you for watching.
So what is okay? So they can't decide. It looks to me like they can't decide how the engines are running. Is it running through the Schauberger biomimicry technology, or is it the
Victor
vibrating
Drepanikov, like vibrational ether propulsion.
resonant energy? Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me. I'm like,
Is there any other videos that people share with claims other than what is in these videos?
the only real ones I've seen, let's see, some people, a bit, like Awake Souls, they do things with like comparing like 4 foot tall pools of on top of a Concorde. They have there's that, but then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is like that Jones versus or Jones backwards channel, who's like saying no fuel whatsoever, and that afterburners are plasma, and
Well, that's a little bit out there. I think most
yeah,
people
that's way out there.
have gotten away from saying no fuel whatsoever, because if we say that to them, they're like, "We didn't say no fuel. It's just a lot less."
Yeah,
But nobody
they
can
don't say
how much less.
There's just a lot less. I'm like, okay, so yeah, so my easiest big debunk on all that. So that means you have to tell me that every piece of field measuring and monitoring equipment from the refinery to the aircraft is, was, and always will be inaccurate. That means you have an entire industry utilizing faulty equipment. Yeah.
So there you go, 300 gallons.
Mhm.
So this is average. 300 gallons or 1,135 liters per minute is average. And that's one nozzle, right?
Yeah, that's one nozzle from one truck.
Right.
And they can do two, so
yeah, so you can have two nozzles going at the same time.
you have 600 gallons per minute going.
So here, an Airbus A380, one truck, a single nozzle at 300 gallons per minute would take almost 5 hours to fill up. Or a truck with dual nozzles, of course, that time then goes and cuts in half. Two trucks with dual nozzles, a little over an hour. And typical fill time, if the tanks are already at 15%, which typically they are, is an hour.
Yeah. But if 300 And what they're saying from Spacebusters, they said 45 minutes, so you would need like 450 gallons per minute. And one of the other links, second one down, actually shows like all the information about that. The 300 is actually kind of like on the low end.
This one?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, just be scrolling down a bit there. There it is, right there. Between, you can actually have flow rates.
A 6-inch
And
diameter lateral pipe provides a flow rate between 600 and 1,000 gallons per minute at 7 feet per second to 10 feet per second velocity. That one.
the sentence right below it is just the one that really nails it.
This one.
Yeah.
It generally takes between 300 and 400 gallons per minute to fuel one narrow-body aircraft, or between 500 and 600 gallons per minute to fuel a wide-body jumbo aircraft. When an aircraft has a dual fuel point, a fill rate of 1,000 gallons per minute is likely. The hydrant fuel pit is an underground fiberglass pit in which the lateral fuel pipe connects into a hydrant valve. The manually controlled hydrant valve controls fuel pressure and flow to the aircraft. So
So you want to
mute that, yeah.
But then you see the fuelers with their pump truck. That's a Philip 747.
This is
And it only got like
747, okay, which is another huge jet.
Oh yeah, it was the only thing that like trumped it was the A380. So this has been known as the Queen of the Skies. It's been around since the late 60s. I still have yet to fly on one, but it would be cool. But these things it's just freaking massive.
Right, so here's the 6-inch line that they were just talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that gets hooked up from the pump truck. I can't believe we even have to go over this.
I know, we actually have to like this is like a procedure, folks. They don't do these quick, crazy turnarounds. Like
that's the other thing I wanted to make sure that we discussed, is that it's not like this is a quick turnaround aircraft either.
No.
Right? This aircraft, there's so many people on it that it does take a while for them to deboard everybody and get everybody's luggage off of it. And not only that, they'll have all that time for the crews to work on it from the outside. So
yeah,
the turnaround time is not unreasonable for it to take this long to refuel these larger jets.
Mm-hmm.
It actually makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I flew on a 777 once. It's like basically like doesn't have the double deck, but still 10 abreast, and it takes some time to board everybody. And I was like one of the guys in the very back. It takes like over an hour, it seems like, because you got multiple hundreds of people getting on board, which is pretty insane to think about.
Right. I have not flown on a plane that big, so I don't even know, how much sooner they start the boarding call before takeoff.
Mm-hmm.
Because typically it's like a half hour, 45 minutes, because we're all flying on these smaller jets.
Single aisle. It's like boom.
Yeah.
And I know it's like it's crazy. I mean, that's why they have like multiple sky bridges out to board everybody. There's
Right.
like three on an A380, one that goes directly to the second floor. They have two on the lower levels for like, the premium passengers, one for economy. And I can't imagine how crazy that's got to be. And
right.
They say the pilots are down. Yeah. That's just, so see, it's like it's not going like, straight up. It feels like going straight up into the freaking wing skins.
Right. It's not going through a condensed nozzle that is shooting through the top of the wing.
Yeah. No.
They probably have baffles inside too to like regulate the flow, the bringing the fuel inside. Like I imagine they would think about these things.
I know. I mean, the engineering, they know that time is money, so they're trying to like, okay, what's the easiest, like most efficient way I can do this? that's cost effective, blah blah blah, and make it to reality. I'm like, this is what they do.
Yeah, so here they are with the truck with it connected to the ground and the
Mm-hmm.
two hoses. You can see the two hoses there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's doing the same thing going on the right side, but more the left side, but I'm sure it probably
More than
is.
likely it is, right? To
Yeah.
keep it even. So whatever's
Mm-hmm.
happening over here is happening over there.
Yeah. But yeah. This is it's a well orchestrated dance of machines. Oh yeah, this is an older video. Yeah, 7 years ago. So yeah, it says like A380 that's no livery, so it's brand new. This is testing time, so it's probably like a very light flight going somewhere, but yeah, so yeah, everybody watching, everyone videoing,
Mm-hmm.
trolling our guy there. See this pump truck going. But here's the fun thing. We get to watch not just one, but two trucks going at it.
Mm-hmm.
So
So you'll see here that they do fuel both sides at the same time.
mm-hmm. It's like this is not a display. This is not just for shits and giggles.
Mm-hmm.
They're really filling these vehicles up. I'm sorry, not seeing some wild, outlandish like flow of fuel making everything just like go crazy while it's fueling, but it is also heavy equipment utilizing this stuff as well. So I'm sure the engineers thought about this. Getting
Right.
caps, got a little
So
merch.
it's like it defaults two hoses. It's like they don't even really mess around with one hose, do they? They're just like they
No, it's an A380, man. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
we're gonna just spend 4 hours waiting. Like, no, we're trying to get this plane up in the air. If it's on the ground, it ain't making money. It's like people are like all pissed off with the cost of fuel. I'm like, well, look at the price of first class on like Emirates. They have like, you got like a basically a mini apartment. You got the shower and all this stuff, and it's like 20, 30 grand one way. So they can afford the fuel, they can afford the employees. Because if they didn't, they'd go under.
Mm-hmm. So and here's truck number 2 on the other
Mm-hmm.
wing.
And fun fact, out of the 250, I believe, A380s in existence, like over half of them are owned by Emirates.
Yeah.
So you can see
Right.
where that oil money where it's going.
Right.
That's just wild. But yeah, it's just a much. This is a very well orchestrated.
Takes a lot of people to make this thing
Mhm.
go.
It
Like
does.
when
You
you
have the
start
grounds people.
looking
You
at
have
it, yeah, it takes a lot of workers to make
You have the
this thing
fuelers. You
go.
have the Sky Chef trucks behind there loading up with food. You have your ramp workers loading and unloading everyone's
Right.
freaking cargo luggage.
And the AC vent there, like airing the thing out and
You have maintenance techs going in, doing some pre-checks around. Well, here we have like this is like I said, this is for like a demonstration purposes. So they're just kind of like having a whole bunch of bigwigs out and about,
mm-hmm.
showing
Airplane fuel tank entry and critical inspection. Oh,
yeah
cool.
on a 767 there. That's kind of cool. I mean, flew one of those once 30 years ago.
What
Yeah,
model is it?
it's Boeing 767.
Okay.
They came out early like 1983, 84
Ventilation ducts, yes.
because you got to air out the fumes, ventilation.
Right? They're not air compressor ducts.
Yeah. Oh, it's windmilling, so that means
Windmilling
it's
engine.
generating
Windmilling.
ether injection.
Yeah, that has a spiral painted on it, but there's it's not an actual spiral inside
But
per
yeah,
se.
it's spiraling just to show the ground crew which way the engine's turning and that it is moving.
Yeah.
Because safety's kind of a big deal there.
Right, because you don't want to get sucked into that bad boy.
Not into the very expensive food processor blades. No, I don't want to go out that way. So here they're going into like one of the larger tanks in the center fuselage, because along with wing tanks, various other aircraft, they have tanks elsewhere. The A380 is kind of the exception because I learned this just like less than a week ago about the wings on aircraft. It's like they were actually envisioning about having a stretched version of that guy. So an even larger A380, but the same wingspan, but longer. And it's already hell on a handbasket just to get it into the airports that it is at.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, you have to be
No
a
wonder you were
thin
saying you have to be under a certain waist size
Mhm.
circumference
That's
to get in
why.
there. Oh,
And you better not be claustrophobic either, because that's going to be,
and you see how it's sectioned off. Like this is not
yeah,
the complete tank. This would be one
yeah.
part of it,
These are your baffles. See, it's like,
right?
yeah, it's not 100% sealed, but that's going to reduce the sloshing like 99% right there. That little guy.
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? That's like going to cause like this massive amount of surging and sloshing. Like you guys really need to like use some critical thought here. Like it's not that your fuel tanks in your car don't even have this kind of baffling. Granted, it's
Mm-mm.
the weight per, weight of the tank versus or the weight of the fuel in the tank versus your car itself is not like a 1-to-1 ratio like an aircraft. But yeah, this will definitely prevent some sloshing. You have your pickup tubes, transfer tubes, so you can have fuel transferred from one tank to the next in case you have to.
Mm-hmm.
It's like these tanks are hermetically sealed, so that's why they test it with air because they don't want anything bubbling. So they do a little bubble test. They'll
Uh-huh.
spray fluids on top of the wings, underneath the wings. If they see any air, I'm like, well, I have an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they also wait a couple days. They try to have like a couple days of airing out the tanks so you don't have all these fumes in there.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fuel that would be in there, and you're just gonna go in there and willy-dilly. So you probably get something.
Do what it takes for safety, inspecting those fuel
Yeah,
tanks.
I know. As like, silly as this seems redundant, I'm like, well, they kind of have to. It's hundreds of people's, thousands of people's lives that it, you know, and when we get into the topic of like all the aircraft accidents and incidents and such, one, I should actually go be looking for the link for that, but that was one that was due partially to bad maintenance or maintenance practices.
All right, well, that's pretty cool.
You guys are saying there's like this big, massive discrepancy, but if there is, then it's like all, then everything that they do about pertaining to fuel just kind of goes out the window because the first two things that air traffic control is going to ask the flight crew, and whenever they call for a mayday, mayday, mayday call, is they're going to ask for souls on board and fuel on board. So they know like if they have enough fuel, they can divert to XYZ airport. If their original destination is they can't do it or something of that sort. Also, other reasons, souls on board, of course, for people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then the way the flight crew even plan for their trips, like they have their primary fuel for taxiing, the flight time, continuance fuel, their diversion fuel, and then their final reserve fuel. If they got to have all that fuel accounted for, it's implemented, given to the fuelers, they do the fueling, it loads up onto their on their end, see how much fuel on pounds or kilograms, whatever they use. They go from there. So and that's why they do their checks every so often along the flight route as well. Just make sure everything's like hunky dory, nothing's out of the ordinary.
I like this little thing here about why the wings are used for storing fuel. It makes good points.
Mm-hmm.
An aircraft wing is hollow from inside with a truss structure for structural airport, as we just watched in the last video. The truss structure elements act as baffle plates to break liquid waves during aircraft maneuvers, analogous to design of water and oil tankers. Storing fuel in the wings of the aircraft also actually helps with maintaining a uniform center of gravity of the aircraft throughout the flight. If the fuel tanks were located towards the tail or nose of the aircraft, its center of gravity would shift by reduction weight of fuel due to ongoing fuel consumption. And that totally makes sense.
Hmm.
So it's kind of spread out evenly over the
Yeah, like center
wingspan.
of the body, so it's like
Mm-hmm.
gives them the best weight distribution. And like I said, some of the aircraft that do have trim tanks in their horizontal stabilizer, or just like kind of like the rear of the aircraft, like
Mm-hmm.
Concorde did, they use that for when they're going from transonic speeds to supersonic speeds, and the fuel is shifting because they listening to a documentary, like say like it would shift like 5 feet in those short times. So it's a lot of like stretching around of where fuel's
Mm-hmm.
going. So they had to balance it out with all these crazy pumps, and everything on that aircraft is so far beyond its time. It's insane that it was even in the air, but
I like the
that's
last
cool.
reason. It's simple. The fuel is consumed by the aircraft jet engines that are installed on its wings. So it provides simplicity in fuel supply design as fuel is available very near to the point of consumption. Oh,
Yeah,
it's common sense.
I know, right? I mean, they even designed it so that, in case fuel pumps went out, they could actually just be gravity fed.
Yeah.
Shocking.
How dare you say gravity?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
All
Not really
right.
electric
So
slash
now
slash.
let's go over some famous aircraft accidents that have happened as a result of loss of fuel or not enough fuel.
So like that last video we were watching, guys, were in a 767, so vehicle basically exactly this. But it was flying from like I said, between Montreal and Edmonton. They already knew that the fuel gauge was kind of gone, so they had to use the little level stick or whatever fuel measuring the fuel level. This also said the date here was like in 1983. So this is right during the time when Canada was adopting the metric system. So guess what? The whole so aside that they accurately measured fuel levels using the fuel lever thing on the wings, whatever, which all aircraft are installed with as a source of redundancy when if said fuel gauge goes out,
Hmm.
like this one did,
They had fuel
they can measure
quantity
it that way.
indicator.
Hmm.
They had high failure rates in the 767, and the only available replacement was also non-functional. The problem was logged, but later the maintenance crew misunderstood the problem and turned off the backup FQIS. This required the fuel to be manually measured using a drip stick. The navigational computer required the fuel to be entered in kilograms. However, an incorrect conversion from volume to mass was applied, which led the pilots and ground crew to agree that it was carrying enough fuel for the remaining trip. The aircraft was carrying only 45% of its required fuel load. The aircraft ran out of fuel halfway to Edmonton, where maintenance staff were waiting to install a working FQIS that they had borrowed from another airline. Oh, man.
Yeah. So yeah, instead of hitting 22,000 kilograms, they got 22,000 pounds. So the so even though the engines were windmilling, they did not generate thrust, and the aircraft was soon on its lovely descent from 41,000 feet.
Right.
Uh,
There was no over unity.
no, none of that was going on. They actually had to deploy this thing called the ram air turbine in the back, so that they actually have like the most minimal of flight display and electronics going on during the aircraft. And the rat or whatever, just a little ram air turbine, just a little like the windmilling guy in the back, and it just generates electrical power for said time. Yeah, the pilot, he was a seasoned glider pilot, and the co-pilot was trained at the airport or airfield or the city at least, or whatever, and that had the rundown airport being used as a drag strip at the time. So
Oh,
they got a big
wow.
surprise when they found that aircraft coming down silent, this gigantic vehicle coming down silently in the air.
That's
Uh,
wild. That must have been
th-
wild to see.
Yeah, because they can't use flaps. They just had basic aileron.
Yeah, because it says right here on the 767, the control surfaces are so large that the pilots cannot move them with muscle power alone. It has a hydraulic system used to multiply the forces applied by the pilots, and since the engines supply power for the hydraulic systems, in the case of a complete power outage, the aircraft was designed with a ram air turbine, that's what you're talking about, that swings out from a compartment located beneath the bottom of the 767 and drives a hydraulic pump to supply power to hydraulic systems. Well, it's a good thing they did that.
Yeah, it's like, or else they would have been, everyone would have died.
They would have just fallen completely out of the sky, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the fact that they didn't have flaps, so they'd landing at insane speeds. So the shows right there, 220 knots or 250 miles an hour.
At optimum glide speed to have the maximum range and therefore the largest choice of possible landing sites, making his best guess as to this speed for the 767. He flew the aircraft at 220 knots. Started to calculate whether they could reach Winnipeg. Quintal used the altitude from one of the mechanical backup instruments while the distance traveled was supplied by the air traffic controllers in Winnipeg, measured by the aircraft's radar echo observed at Winnipeg. In 10 nautical miles, the aircraft lost 5,000 feet, giving a glide ratio of roughly 12 to 1. Dedicated glider planes reach 50 to 1 to 71. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
how many miles did it go before it finally hit
it was
the
think it
ground?
was like a little over 40. It might say at the bottom, I'm not 100% sure, but
both engines were completely starved of fuel, and the plane made hardly any noise during its approach. Yeah, wow.
yeah. And for reference, it's like, 767-200 is, what was it? I think it's like 157 feet long, and its wingspan's like 130, 140 feet long. It's not small. It's bigger than your typical 737 or so. Mid-size aircraft. It's big. It's 7 abreast.
The next one is the record holder.
Yeah, this is a different feeling and issue. It had here we go. The Air Transit Flight 236, also known as the Azores glider or some Atlantic glider. It had a total of 306 people on, 293 of them passengers, but it had a fuel issue due to like incorrect maintenance. I think it was like an oil pump or a fuel pump or something along those lines, whatever. But the fuel hose, it got severed in the process because it was like the wrong size.
Yeah, it says a fuel leak in number 2. The right engine began 3 hours, 46 minutes into the flight that was not detected by the flight crew. Due to a developing fuel shortage, 1 hour and 7 minutes after the fuel leak began, the flight crew initiated a diversion from the planned route for landing at Lajes Airport in Terceira Island in the Azores. Approximately 150 nautical miles from Lajes Airport, the crew notified air traffic control that the right engine had flamed out. Then the aircraft was about 65 nautical miles from the Lajes Airport and an altitude of about 34,500 feet. The crew reported that the left engine had also flamed out and that a ditching at sea was possible.
Yeah, because they misinterpreted like what actually was happening. They didn't see. They even asked like one of the flight attendants to go in the back to like check see if there's any fuel leakage. Of course, during the middle of the night, you can't see anything, and it's all vapor at that time. So what they did was they did the dumb thing, and they started transferring fuel from the left side to the right, where the number 2 engine is. So they've lost even more fuel. And I guess even like according to the checklist, when they have like an engine flame up, that they need to descend to a safer level, so they'd have to like drop like 10,000 feet. But had they did that on top of the stupid maneuvers that they just did, they wouldn't have made it to the little island that they did by gliding. They kept it at that altitude of 34,000 or whatever, and did the same thing, ram air turbine, and they only have one shot at this.
Yeah.
And they did. No one died, but I think they got some. I'm sure they received some punishment for that. Let's see. Do I have? Oh yeah.
Unusual engine oil indications on the number 2 engine.
Mhm.
While the flight crew was investigating the unusual engine oil indications, the trim tank transfer system automatically began a 19-minute forward transfer. Oh, so the Tim tank started trying to balance everything out, and it
And
started
doing so,
moving
it just transferred all the fuel right out the freaking other side
right
that's just going right up
to the
overboard
side that's
anyway.
leaking. So,
Yeah,
okay,
instead of like cutting it off and just transferring it to the left side and let it burn naturally, you'd be a lot better off.
this
But
final fuel
they didn't know.
transfer, which was completed at 5:30, would not normally incur until late in the flight, about 35 minutes from the destination airport. Because fuel was leaking from the right engine, the system automatically transferred more fuel to the right inner tank in order to maintain balance between the left and the right inner fuel tank quantities. So,
hmm
okay, so there you go, and there you have all of the different fuel tanks there.
You have the shrimp tank in the back. You have the center tank. You have all these tanks. Just everything's going right out the window. And I guess when they did check the fuel gauge, it had next to nothing for fuel. And I mean, well, obviously not enough for it to even start.
The crew became aware the
But
fuel remaining on board was only 11,000 kilograms or 8,500 kilograms below the expected amount of fuel at that point in the flight. According to the crew, both the imbalance and fuel quantity indications were unusual and unexplainable. It was further learned during the investigation that neither of the pilots had ever encountered a fuel leak or an unexplained low fuel quantity, either in training or in flight.
yeah,
Oh,
so there's like, there's several issues in their big, Swiss cheese model they always say about problems that happen in aircraft. It's like, yeah, training is another
mm-hmm.
big issue. Granted, pilots are, flying the aircraft 100%. They're doing basically primarily just like your taxiing, landing, and takeoffs, and the rest just doing automation and just checking, making supervising everything, making sure everything goes okay. And in this case, they misinterpreted what their
So
gauges were telling them.
this one, it says the left engine flamed out at 6:26 when the airplane was 65 nautical miles from the airport. Control of the flight transferred to Lajes approach control. The aircraft arrived about 8 miles off of the approach end of the runway 33 at approximately 13,000 feet on a track of 270 degrees, and the captain advised Lajes that he was conducting a left 360-degree turn in order to lose altitude. During the turn, the crew extended the leading edge slats and landing gear for landing and conducted S-turns on the final approach to lose additional altitude. The aircraft crossed the threshold of runway 33 at about 200 knots, touching down hard at 1,030 feet from the end of the runway and bounced back in the air. A second touchdown occurred 2,800 feet from the approach end of the runway, and the crew applied maximum braking. The aircraft came to a stop 7,600 feet from the approach end of the 10,000-foot runway. Oh, wow, look at that. It broke the
Yeah, it
wheels.
bursted the
Burst the
tires.
tire. Yeah, hitting the brake so hard.
Yeah, it just melted. Yeah.
So
Oh, sorry.
65 miles, that's longer than the Gimli glider then, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah. That was
So it's
a
like another 20 miles. That's crazy.
mm-hmm.
But
That's
again,
just
this happened because it ran out of fuel.
yeah. I know. It wasn't going on that magical, etherical, sipping the fuel propulsion that this Victor Schauberger basically came up in the 40s when he was working with Hitler 20 years after the engine, or 10 years after the engine had already been designed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last flight is something some people may or may not have heard of much of, but these situations known as ghost planes. One prime example is Payne Stewart. Same kind of a situation. The automatic cabin pressurization wasn't active, and when you get above 10,000 feet, hypoxia will start to set in because now you've lost all the cabin pressure is just not there anymore. So you're breathing in that completely reducing air pressure going on the outside. Then they just had to like guesstimate based on how much fuel load and its speed and its altitude and heading and where it would land when it ran out of fuel. They got
So
within,
the
but
115 passengers and 6 crew members on board were fatally injured and the aircraft was destroyed. The flight, Helios HCY 522, was planned flight from Larnaca, Cyprus to Prague, Czech, and and the Republic via Athens, Greece. The final descent into terrain was the result of both engines flaming out due to fuel starvation after the airplane had been under automatic control in a high-altitude holding pattern in the vicinity of Athens International Airport. The direct cause of the accident was determined to be incapacitation of the flight crew due to hypoxia. This was the result of the flight crew's failure to correctly configure the aircraft's pressurization system prior to flight and their subsequent incorrect response to the high cabin altitude associated warnings. This accident highlighted human failures related to checklist discipline and served the question the airworthiness assumptions that allowed the dual use of a horn for takeoff configuration and cabin altitude warnings. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't matter.
When you're flying and everything, when you hear the double ding, after you've taken off, that's when you've reached 10,000 feet.
Oh, okay.
If you're still breathing, you're good.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So they lost pressurization, and then everybody died from, what was it, hypoxia?
Yeah, everyone became brain dead, and you have no oxygen in the brain. Everyone's
incapacitation of the flight crew due to hypoxia. So they lost pressure and everything. So the inside of the aircraft, they all died, and then the plane just kept going until it ran out of fuel and crashed.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the last few seconds, though, it was like actually this is the one where one of the flight staff was actually in training to become a pilot, and the flight staff the flight crew, they already had, or not flight crew, the cabin crew have their own separate oxygen tanks, so they can help out more or less with others. But they're like up for an hour, and one of the guys, he was smart enough. Unfortunately, he used all the tanks to like stay alive for as long as he could, apparently, because when they sent up fighters to check on anyone visibly might be alive in that aircraft or whatever is going on,
because they're not responsive or whatever.
Yeah, he was the one who was conscious for a little bit, and all he did was like just point down, and that's when the aircraft just plummeted, which is freaking sad. But
that is sad.
Yeah.
But if the airplanes were not using fuel, that plane would have just kept going forever and ever. Amen.
Yeah, I know. It's like why didn't,
right? Like why?
When they say little to no fuel, I'm like, this is a common aircraft using a high bypass ratio engine. It's not a LEAP engine. That's what the Maxes use, but still. Like, and what Airbus the Neo family use, like that's what those LEAP. They have a LEAP 1A for Airbus, LEAP 1B for Boeing. That's just a geared turbofan. There's nothing really out of the ordinary. All three main engine suppliers use different technology to get a better fuel burn. And if that were true, why are they spending these countless multi-million dollars to improve like maybe 5% on a fuel burn? I'm like, it's because they use fuel. And what are they using fuel primarily for? On their cruise portion of their flight. I don't understand people's like logic anymore with this stuff. I mean,
this is the last link. So this one, what is this?
This is the Tanister Air. This is where a system where actually the fuel gauge actually was the wrong fuel gauge. For this aircraft, it's an ATR-72, basically the same type of aircraft that fell in the sky in Brazil, the little flat spin.
Oh, yeah.
This one was using the fuel module for an ATR-42, which is a little bit smaller, and it holds like 500 kilograms less fuel. So it's interacting with the fueling equipment within the wings of the aircraft already. So when that's happening, there's a miscommunication going. The pilots think they got XYZ fuel, and they didn't. They had like less than half, I believe. And this is for a passenger flight going around the Mediterranean, trying to get to lower part of like Rome or somewhere close to it, and Palermo. But anyway, the rotor's on a turboprop, which is essentially a turbofan engine designed differently for this configuration, different type of aircraft. But anyway, a nice cool ability about these aircraft is like the ability for the props to be able to be cambered and turned around, like tilted a different way, like for when not in use, like the aircraft's not, so if it's wind blowing, it's not going to propel itself forward. That's what they should have done because they lost fuel, so they ended up having to glide like the prior two examples have. or the first two examples did, and they didn't make their destination. They instead went for ditching in the ocean or the water. In the process, I believe it was like 16 people died, or let's see, but how many people died, unfortunately? There wasn't so many people on board in the first place, but yeah, 39 total on board. Where was
14
it?
passengers. What does it say? On impact with the surface of the sea, broke in three. 14 passengers, the airline engineer, and a member of the crew reported fatal injuries.
Yes, 16 dead out of 39. It's about half. The flight crew ended up being prosecuted and brought up on charges because due to simulation and replication through, aviation investigation, they found that if they did, windmill, not windmill, straight plane under whatever the term is for turn their props away. But if they did it that way, where the props are going against the wind, so there's no thrust being generated, they could have made their destination, but they didn't. And this is the end result. The pilot got like 8 years, co-pilot got like 6, 7 years.
Dang,
so,
man.
Yeah. So a combination of maintenance and pilot error.
But
yeah, so
both engines flame out because of fuel exhaustion.
Shocking. But again, it's not running on the magical show of our technology. So yeah, I'm not going to deny that Schauberger wasn't a great inventor and that had amazing ideas, but
investigation of Victor Schauberger's Vortex engine.
Yeah. Everyone's saying this magical vortex engine that's going to suck a plane through the air.
Right. That sucks the plane through the ether. Okay. Investigation of Schauberger's work. Let's see.
Yeah, the third paragraph on the bottom there said it's therefore concluded it was unlikely engine.
Well, let's read a little bit before that. It was found after extensive CFD modeling that while the drag on the rotating wall of the container was reduced, it was not due to an increase in the intensity of the vortex system. It was then found that when heat was added and subtracted from different parts of the vessel, the vortices did actually increase in velocity. However, this extra kinetic energy could not be transformed to rotational energy in the system, and extra rotation could not be generated. The key to this might lie in a blade system that Schauberger evidently had in his engine. When this type of process was tested, however, the engine became completely unstable. The engine wasn't able to rotate as fast as required because the blades were displacing too much air. The CFD solver did not work for the high speeds of rotation that were specified by Schauberger. It was therefore concluded that it was unlikely an engine of this sort is possible. The velocity of the vortices in the system were unable to be increased when heat was both added and subtracted, but this extra kinetic energy could not be transformed into rotational energy. When blades were implemented to accomplish this, the system became impractical. It is unlikely that Schauberger would have been able to displace the air in his engine and rotate fast enough for extra rotation to be generated. Therefore, after a year of testing and investigation, it was found that a vortex engine of the type of Schauberger apparently developed would be unlikely to either fly or produce extra rotation or energy. It is concluded that either function is theoretically unlikely. Without better information on Schauberger's engine, however, it cannot be conclusively stated without a doubt that it is impossible. The indications at this point, however, clearly suggest that it is theoretically unlikely. So that's from 2005. Now, and also diagrams of modern jet engines show that it's actually nothing like a Schauberger engine, right?
It's just been the slow incremental investment since Frank Whittle's initial design. And it's just a series now, like these well-balanced, well-machined, precision balanced fins and stators and compressors and fans. I mean, they're using carbon fiber with these micromillimeter tolerances here between the edge of the fan blades and the engine cover itself. I mean, it's insane. I mean, yeah, look, if you close your eyes and bend upside down or whatever, it might look remotely like it, though it's more like a torque converter, if anything, from that perspective.
Right.
I mean, because they're basing this on the fact for UFO technology, saying how the Nazis apparently got this. He was allegedly responsible for coming up with this said engine to make a silent vehicle running off air or whatever or something. But University of Queensland says otherwise. But, who knows? Maybe there's some great Nazi science. I don't know. It would just be speculation, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Right. If it is, I feel like if planes really could run off their Schauberger technology, this impeller engine or whatever, and suck itself through the ether, build an airplane model, they got little to scale planes. You can put whatever sort of thing you want to put in there. Build the engine, recreate it, do it, show us, prove us all wrong, shut us all up.
I know. Where's that massive class action lawsuit against the airlines and the airframe manufacturers and the engine manufacturers and the instrumentation manufacturers against the fuel that we allegedly did not use for flight?
Right. Exactly.
And tell that to like the dozens of airlines that have gone under because of poor maintenance or poor business practices, I guess. Because, apparently racking all that money hand over fist due to charging people for fuel they don't use still led them to have apparently bad coke issues or something. I don't know, coke habits.
Bad coke habits.
and their business went under. I don't know, something like that. I highly doubt it. But yeah, it's like, prove me wrong, because I just keep getting shown the same stuff over and over again. And it's like, this is easily debunkable with a few examples and some common sense.
Yeah. All right. So what else? Is that it? Is that all we need to show for now? Is that good?
I think so. That should be a good starting point, because I really, unless someone has some other crazy wild idea, because like I said, like prior, no one ever showed the dimensions of these fuel tanks on these fuel trucks that say you can just stack on the wings of an aircraft to make your theory seem more plausible. They don't show that. They don't show the size of the aircraft. They don't depict like where all the fuel tanks are located. They don't just talk about the fuel pressures from the aircraft, the hoses, anything, none of the logistics. They don't have no specificity, and it's just a big, broad vagueness to
it
get
is very vague, very suggestive, but it doesn't have any proof. So just make sure whenever you're watching these videos from these content creators to go and thoroughly do your own research, more than surface level research. Sometimes you have to spend an afternoon looking into things, but it's better to spend that one afternoon looking into things and sort of find out for yourself whether or not it's worth spending countless afternoons believing or talking about or perpetuating something that is completely false.
Yeah.
So that is why we decided to record and do this video for those out there who really want to know the truth about stuff and who don't want to waste their time on nonsense, or make themselves look foolish by sharing these nonsense ideas with people who know better, who could go through and explain all this stuff probably in more detail than we just did.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a pilot. I'm not a mechanic. It's like I just grew up around aviation. I had parents who worked either Boeing or for the airline, so I got to have like hands-on, first viewpoint there. It was great. First-hand knowledge and such. So I got walk around the parts of airports that people aren't normally allowed to. I've flown hundreds of times. I love seeing and remembering all the cool, intricate stuff. It's like the smell of fuel. It's like, understand that, things do happen and humans are fallible and things will, sometimes go wrong. But it's a safe form of transportation, but it isn't using magical etherical propulsion.
Right. I guess that is the conclusion of Karen and Ted's excellent jet fuel hoax debunking adventure.
Exactly.
All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I got one more little jab for you. There's tons of flat Earth pilots. Lots of pilots have come forward and said, yes, the Earth is level and stationary, but not one pilot has come forward and said that there is any validity to the jet fuel hoax conspiracy. There is not one pilot who has come forward and said that jets do not use the fuel that they say they do, and they do not use the technology that we are told that they use. And again, I want to reiterate that there is absolutely no hate meant in this video to anybody who believes in this hoax or who has made videos about this hoax. However, I do believe there is no validity to it, and I challenge you to challenge your beliefs, no matter where they came from. All right? Much love and take care.